When Jeff Comes Home, Chapter 17. The next morning, Dad and I spent a silent breakfast together. For some incomprehensible reason, he had prepared an elaborate meal: scrambled eggs, bacon, pancakes, and rolls. I picked at it only enough to avoid comment, then settled in the living room to wait for Stevens. I wanted to go up to my room, but I didn't want to give Dad the chance to attack me again for escaping. I had recognized several of the reporters from before, only this time they had harder looks, more of a pushing frenzy when we all emerged from the Jeep. Two of the TV crews had blocked our driveway, and Dad had been forced to park in the street. Silent this time, he had taken my elbows and steered me through the crowd. Cringing without knowing why, I had looked at Dad in mute apology as the reporters called my name and his. His face wooden, Dad had merely propelled me the rest of the way to the door, looking back only once to bark, "Brian!" Brian had scrambled up the stairs after us, but not before one man's voice stood out of the crowd. "Jeff, is it true Ray Slate took nude photos of you?" Unable to stop myself, I turned around to face my inquisitor as Dad fumbled with the door. As I had thought, it was the pudgy young woman who had questioned me before. Standing ahead of the crowd, and somehow apart from them, the reporter looked up at me, earnest and relentless. "Is it true?" he prompted. Oops, pudgy young man. "Did Slate take pictures of you?" Detached as the shock hit me, I shook my head. "No, it's not true." Dad got the door open and tugged on the back of my jersey, murmuring my name. I sleepwalked the few steps back, Brian pushing past me. As the door shut on the mob, I had caught a glimpse of Vin at its edges, his gaze on me sharp and speculative. Ray and I stood in his front room, kissing. He held me close, moving his hands slowly over my body. Pleasure and shame washed over me in almost equal amounts. Someone was outside, walking toward the house. Unless Ray hurried, he would not finish before the stranger arrived. But I could not rush him, and I could not pull away from him. All I could do was live in Ray's time and move to his rhythm. "Jeff!" Dad shouted, shaking my shoulder. My eyes flew open before I was truly awake. I stared at him, not sure where I was for a moment. "You were having a nightmare," he said, pushing his hair back. "You must have fallen asleep on the couch." I sat up, breathing hard, wondering what he had seen. "Are you all right?" Dad asked roughly. I nodded. "Must have been a bad one. You almost fell off the couch. You were moving around so much." "I'm sorry," I said. No, Dad said, waving a hand in my direction. He hesitated, looking away. "Listen, Dave is here." "What?" I said, my stomach clenched in on itself. "Here? Where?" He just pulled up outside," Dad modified. "So get yourself together. You're going to talk to him now." I didn't like the implied threat in his voice. "I have nothing to say to Stevens, or you." "But you are going to talk to him," Dad said. "But go on and pull yourself together." It was the second time he had said something like that, and I wondered how long he had watched me in my dream that was too close to the reality I had known. Then I realized I was drenched in sweat, far out of proportion to the temperature in the room. "I'm going upstairs to take a shower," I said, testing him. Dad nodded without looking at me. "That's fine, Jeff. Go ahead." As the hot water pounded me, I ran my hands over the ridges of my back, letting myself really feel them for the first time. They felt huge, rough, corded, stretching as far up my spine as I could reach. I grabbed a washcloth off the towel rack, wrapping it around a bar of soap, and scoured my back, rubbing deep and hard. I stood outside the living room for a moment, leaning my head against the wall, eyes closed. Dad and Stephen spoke so quietly I could not make out what they were saying. But then, afraid I might hear something I could not bear, I stepped into the archway where they could see me. They stopped talking abruptly. "Come in," Dad said, nodding to me. Stephen stood next to the picture window, more rumpled than before. But his eyes were alert, intent on mine. "Sit down," he said. "We have some things we need to talk about." When I didn't move, Dad nodded me toward a chair. I hesitated, then sat. Dad and Stephen settled opposite each other on the flanking couches, and I was surrounded. What's the big dramatic news?" I said too loudly. 2 days ago, we found Slate's car in San Francisco, the Lexus you described. It was towed out of a private driveway 6 blocks from your dad's office the same day you saw Slate. It's been an impound all this time. I nodded impatiently. Yeah, you found his car and? The officers who searched the car found some photos of you taped under the front seat, nude photos. I stared at Stevens, playing his words back in my head. Then, as their impact hit me, I closed my eyes, finally, crushingly humiliated. Oh God, Ray, we were driving for hours and you were telling me how you loved me and shit, and we were sitting on those goddamn pictures. You must have been laughing the whole time. Stevens was calling my name. What? I whispered, my eyes fixed now on the coffee table where Royston had dumped out my clothes. Tell me about the pictures. I shook my head, clasping my hands tightly together. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Dad shift position. He's talking, kid. Stephen's voice was gentle. Did you know that? He got a whole story about those pictures and how they came to be. I sank back into the chair, as weakened as if Ray were in the room with us. Why was I kidding myself? He was here, reaching out to touch me again. You confronted Slate about the photos? Dad spoke suddenly, fiercely. Yes, he confessed, you could say. Confessed? Dad repeated, glancing at me. Stephen sighed. He confessed to having a sexual relationship with Jeff. Period. No force, no kidnapping. I would have given anything not to laugh then, but I did. A short, sharp bark that sounded more like a cough. Stevens ignored me. Slate says Jeff was hitchhiking when he picked him up. He says the kid asked to stay with him, and anything that happened after that was mutual. That's ridiculous. Dad sputtered after another long silence. He can't expect anyone to believe him. He does, Stevens said. That's his case. But Dad looked to me for help. I said nothing. It's past time for Jeff to give his side, Stevens said, and give it strong. His side? Dad's voice was hushed. His side? Sorry, Stevens said briskly. Bad choice of words, but true all the same. The three of us sat in tense silence until Dad reached over and gently clasped the back of my neck. All I could feel was Ray's hand doing the same thing. Don't touch me, I said, shaking him off, goose flesh covering my arms. Sorry, Dad said quickly. I sat on the edge of the chair, wringing my hands together, one leg vibrating from nervousness. I can't do this, I said, hearing the echo of all the other times I had retreated from the truth. Slate is talking about you, Stevens said deliberately. The one thing he won't say is where he kept you. He says you were on the road mostly, driving, camping, for 2.5 years? Hard to believe. I did not respond. What is he trying to hide, Jeff? What are you? I looked up at him quickly. Stephen's eyes narrowed. What are you afraid we're going to find there? More pictures? Videotapes? Pain spiked through my stomach and I gasped. He nodded to himself as if he already knew. You know that anything like that, anything linking Slate with you, is just more evidence against him. You're wrong, I said fiercely, the pain strengthening my voice. You're making stuff up, throwing it out, trying to catch me. We need your help, Stevens said. You need to help yourself. I squirmed, wanting to be gone. He kidnapped me. I told you about that. I'll say it in court. It's not enough. What are you going to do when Slate's lawyer asks you about the sex? Dad held up one hand. Wait, just wait. He isn't going to ask Jeff about that. Ken. Stevens shook his head. You don't understand. That's part of their strategy. Slate and his lawyer know Jeff isn't talking. They know he's scared. I'm not scared, I said. Neither of them looked at me. Jeff isn't talking, Stevens repeated, and they know it. That gives Slate the freedom to shape the story any way he wants. He's admitting that he had something going with the kid. He's not ashamed of it. Shut up, I said softly. Slate says the pictures were your idea, Jeff. He says you offered to pose for them one Christmas. Sickened, I felt my throat go dry. All I could do was shake my head. You gonna let that stand? Stevens persisted. You gonna let Ray Slate do your talking for you? Dad held up his hand. Enough. What do you need from Jeff, today? The location where he was kept, Stevens said promptly. No, I said before he finished speaking. No. Moving deliberately this time, Stevens reached over and grasped my wrist. I stared down at his meaty hand, then back at his face. He's still got you, Jeff. He's 150 miles away and he's still holding you down. When are you going to fight back? I pulled my wrist away, glaring at him. I did fight back, and guess what? It didn't work. Okay, Stevens said. You fought back. Tell me about that. One incident. I stared at him blankly. The punchline of every incident with Ray was the same. I lost. And every loss had pulled me deeper into his world. I could taste that defeat even now, sitting in the quiet living room with Stevens and Dad. I opened my mouth to reply to Stevens, not sure what I was going to say, but Dad spoke for me. Give him some time to think about this, he said. A few more days. Never.